the monument on top of the hill. It's not an ordinary hill, Chatak Parvat. We're in the vicinity of all the pastime places of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and one of them that is what I describe to be a haunting pastime. Haunting in the sense that when we hear of it or we see it, it calls to us in our heart and it stays. That's a haunting. For instance, in the first canto, 5th chapter of the Bhagavatam, Narada Muni is instructing Srila Vyasadeva, and he's telling him to be more direct in his preaching. In fact, he uses strong language, jugupsitam. What you've done so far, which includes editing the Vedas, putting them into 4 parts, putting together the Upanishads and the Itihasas and so forth, page turners in and of themselves, yet we find sections where the Pandavas are endeavoring for heaven and so forth, and there's hints of karmakanda, so forth. He says, Jugupsitam, this is abominable. What you've done is horrible. And he talks about, does Narada, how anything that's separate in vision from the Lord simply disturbs the mind. Like a boat on water that's blown by the wind, which when the boat has no resting place, has no anchor, it's blown here and there. So he said any kind of discussion that isn't direct about the Lord, then one becomes disturbed. And of course we know from the 10th canto, 2nd chapter, when the demigods are praying to Lord Kṛṣṇa within the womb, they say, Yene ravindaksha vamukta maninas tvayasta bhavad avashudha buddhaya aruya kṛṣṇa param tata patantyato nadrita yushmarangaraya. That unless somebody has a relationship with the lotus-eyed Lord, first of all, you have to have some information. Prabhupada writes in his purport to the invocation to the Sri Upanishad, all forms of incompleteness are due to incomplete knowledge of the complete whole. And the verse from Bhagavatam indicates one who has complete knowledge. Yene ravindaksha vamukta maninas. There's a way in which one who knows the source of everything and the ocean of all rasa is Kṛṣṇa, and then has a relationship with Kṛṣṇa. That person is truly on the transcendental platform. Other types of endeavors leave one wanting. What to speak of? They're so insubstantial that one ariya kṛṣṇa param tata. They're hard work, and also patantyada yushmarangraya. You'll fall back down again because you don't have a resting place. And when one takes to devotional service, Narada said, it's so auspicious that even if one who's taken to it falls away from it, then that person, having been embraced by the Lord through the process of hearing and chanting and associating with devotees, will remember that experience again and again. And Śrīla Bhaktisiddhānta Ṭhākura calls that being haunted by rasa. One may go back to one's materialistic ways, but that person remembers again and again the beauty of the spiritual experience in association with devotees hearing about Kṛṣṇa. And the pastime of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu here in Jagannath Puri, which is recounted in the Ādi-līlā, is that one day he was walking and he saw a sand dune. Sand dunes were obviously more visible at that time. Now they're all covered by hotels. And when he saw it, he saw Govardhan and began running at the speed of the mind for the sand dune. What I find haunting about the pastime itself is that all his devotees ran after him. There was a clamor, an alarm was raised, and they ran after Mahaprabhu, who, before he reached Chattaparvat, had frozen in ecstasy and wasn't taking another step. Others, one devotee was lame, and he was going as fast as he could on a bad leg, running behind all the other devotees. And when Paramananda Puri and Brahmananda Bharati came, as they had come to see Mahaprabhu, and found the situation unfolding, as soon as they approached Mahaprabhu, he became a little embarrassed because they were in such an intimate situation for him to be able to be in ecstasy in front of them. He considered them venerable. So he became sober at that point and not intoxicated by rasa ecstasy. And Śrīla Bhaktisiddhānta Sarasvatī Ṭhākura has kept his place of bhajana here. And the name Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta is indicative of his personality. As we hear from the Ādi-līlā, the Caitanya-caritāmṛta, Kavirāja Gosvāmī gives this admonition: siddhānta baliyā citte nakara alash, ha-ite kṛṣṇa lāge sudṛḍha. That's in order to have a determined mind. One's mind has to be determined. One has to be determined to carry on with one's devotional service. And actually the word determined, it has the word terminus in it, means you have to finish what you started. You can't stop, despite the fact that there may be obstacles. And in the verse, Kavirāja Gosvāmī says, you shouldn't be lazy. Alash means to be neglectful, lazy. About what? About discussing the nuance of our relationship with Kṛṣṇa and the meaning of life. Siddhānta baliyā citte nakara alash. Don't be lazy. Face the hard questions, discuss them, even if there is some difference of opinion, and there always is. Discuss it, as Prabhupada used the phrase, thoroughly threadbare. You should come together, he said also, before he left the world, and hear Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam together and discuss it, and in that way your questions will be answered. So siddhānta baliyā citte nakara ha-ite kṛṣṇa lāge sudṛḍha. That in this way, in this world, you'll be able to stay steady despite the anomalies that all of us face, which we were discussing when we were over at the Gopīnātha Mandir. And Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta, of course, the word siddhānta, once I took a class from Pradyumna Prabhu, the devotee from the early days of ISKCON. He was Prabhupada's Sanskrit editor who traveled with him everywhere, because Prabhupada, although he was traveling from one place to another, his other work didn't stop. He continued translating his books and giving commentary, and he needed his staff with him, especially his Sanskrit editor, Pradyumna. And he once was commenting on the word siddhānta, and he said it means to come to pinpoint accuracy in understanding a concept. He said you must understand what it is and also what it isn't, to be that clear. And the reason I bring it up in the context of Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta is because he held the torch for Lord Chaitanya's movement, passed to him by his father, the great Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who had been the revivalist of Lord Chaitanya's movement. Greatly empowered soul, also once called the seventh Goswāmī, because the Goswāmīs had been empowered by Lord Chaitanya to reveal the pastime places of Kṛṣṇa and Vrindavan, and to write about rasa pastimes, to speak of the step-by-step process, for instance, in the Upadeshamrita. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur had also revealed Lord Chaitanya's birthplace, but to speak of all his teachings, which had been obscured by time. Those who, like Madhavananda Prabhu, are always searching for shastras here, there, and everywhere and preserving them, know that sometimes they're lost. In fact, Gopīnātha Prabhu told me once he was looking for a particular shastra. It was at a time when there was a project called Matsya, before we stole the title and took it over, in which devotees were going and finding ancient scriptures, and they were putting them on kids. Don't be disturbed. Microfiche. It's not a fish. It was a way of storing information before nowadays, where there are clouds and all kinds of other things. It was actually a film, and that was one of the ways that you'd store information. They were recording all those things. And he said it took him 1.5 years to find a particular scripture he was looking for. And it wasn't so easy, and he realized that things can be lost over time. And Lord Chaitanya's movement, in fact, had been obscured over time. What to speak of perverted? By degrees, people invent and innovate with the philosophy, and slowly it becomes something completely different, or something that's actually the antithesis of what the original teacher had intended. And there were quite a few of those deviant groups who were teaching various philosophies. Śrīla Bhaktisiddhānta Thakur brought them, Bhaktivinoda Thakur first of all had revived the awareness of Lord Chaitanya's teachings and his movement. He had looked for the Caitanya-caritāmṛta at one point and had difficulty finding it. We're trying to put an end to that. Prabhupada published it, and he wanted it, to everybody's surprise, distributed in mass. And oftentimes when books that devotees thought weren't very bridgy, and they'd ask Prabhupada, how many do you want? And he named in the hundreds of thousands. They were sometimes taken aback, because you go to a baseball game and somebody walks away with an Upadeshamrita. Turn to the last page. And as we've heard from Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta through the lectures of Prabhupada and his teachings, that Śrīla Bhaktivinoda Thakur was a great pioneer, and he had prayed for a way to flesh out his vision for a movement that would bring Lord Chaitanya's teachings to people all over the world. And then he prayed, and he received the answer from the Lord. It was his son, his own son, Śrīla Bhaktisiddhānta Sarasvatī Ṭhākura, whose nickname was the Living Encyclopedia. As a child, people noticed he had a photographic memory. Whatever he would read, whatever it was, whatever he'd hear, he'd just remember all of it. And by his 7th year, he knew all the verses of the Bhagavad Gita. But not just that. We've seen that a lot, actually, even nowadays, right? Even in your family. And there's some, who is that? Her niece, who tested her, wherever that was, at Govardhan or somewhere. She knows the whole, just name any verse, she knows it. But he also knew all the commentaries and could give commentary on all the verses and so forth, and distinguished himself scholastically, Surya Siddhanta, and became a noted scholar among scholars even in his adolescence, and was awarded the title of Siddhanta Sarasvatī. So there's a way that he had a way of emulating his father and accepted him as his Shiksha Guru. It accepted Harinam from him. And Śrīla Bhaktisiddhānta Ṭhākura, unlike many previous Gaudiya sadhus who lived in seclusion and had been satisfied to stay in holy places, Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākura knew a lot about the world. He was trained in law, and he was a high court judge, and very much in demand. He had a record of solving or closing more cases that didn't get reversed on appeal than any other judge, and therefore people wanted him everywhere. Besides, he was a local, and the British were still ruling at that time. And meanwhile, he would spend time writing his literatures. He wrote over 100 books. If anybody's ever written a pamphlet, you know how hard it is. And then even when you're done, somebody will notice, I think you spelled it wrong, or whatever it may be. What to speak of writing a book? It's like building a house, and it's practically never done even after you finish it. But to speak of multiple books, 100, he wrote over 100. And meanwhile, he was raising a family. It wasn't a small family. He had many children, and he also had a very demanding job. So one of his sons was Bimal Dutt. Bimal means, Bimal Prasad Dutt. That he was, Bimal means like effulgence. And he came up as a brilliant child, but then astutely followed the teachings of his father. And Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākura, with his integration in society, he had been part of an intellectual group in which people, scholars, and there were quite a few of them in Bengal, intellectuals, were concocting a universal religious idea to try to harmonize things and put together various ideas that people could take up. But as many acharyas come into the world and they seem to have this trajectory of evolvement, this is one of the ways that great acharyas come, and then they show this path of apparently following the worldly ways, but then they manifest their spiritual powers in such a way that they're undeniable. And so was the case with Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākura, who was arguably one of the first converts to Lord Chaitanya's movement in the modern age. When Caitanya Mahaprabhu was here, there were converts who joined him, not the least of which were Jagai Madai, and of course thousands of others. And then Bhaktivinoda Ṭhākura became the greatest advocate for Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement. And he had a vision for how to integrate it in such a way that people all over the world would be able to take it up. He wasn't interested in sitting in solitary bhajan. And this goes with the very mood of our sampradaya, which is notably messianic and outward-looking, to give it to all people. Our Prabhupada frequently quoted Prahlad Maharaj, Nai Vod Vijay Para Daratyaya Vaitaranyas, in which he says that I don't want to go to a solitary place. And previous verses, he said similar things. Mauna Vrata, people taking these vows, going to the Himalayas and so forth, said, I don't want to do any of that. I want to be in the city where the most most population, the thickest population is, so I can help alleviate the ignorance of these people that they're carrying on their head as a burden. So Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta carried the mantle from Bhaktivinoda Thakur. One of the notable incidents was when there was a great power struggle between the Smartas and the Vaishnavas. So Smartas held a political grip on the religious rights and processes with their idea of it being given by birthright. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur was, of course, teaching the Bhagavat version of what qualifies somebody to be considered a teacher. And when Bhaktivinoda Thakur couldn't attend a conference where this debate would take place on a kind of national or almost world stage, world for all the Vaishnavas, Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta showed him an essay that he had written on the matter, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, being too ill to go, sent his son, who achieved a huge victory there, so much so that the crowd, and in India, when there's crowds, there's really crowds, had noted his adroitness in arguing the topic from Shastra, and having seen his powerful nature, there was a time near the end of the program where everyone wanted to touch his feet, and there was a risk of stampede. If you've ever been in one of those, I was once in Kartik on the parikram, the last Ekadashi of Kartik, and got stuck down in Keshi Ghat in that cave that goes through, and there was a tunnel, and it was 10 people could come in, but one person at a time could go out, and they just kept coming. And I thought, well, actually I didn't think, well, I thought, what am I going to do now? I was looking for higher ground. In any case, they all charged, they wanted it, they were spontaneously attracted to his eruditeness, as well as his clear stature as an exalted Vaishnava. They wanted to take the dust from his feet. So some smart person there, who should have been a temple president or something, then had obtained a huge bucket or barrel, and somehow or other had dipped Śrīla Saraswati's lotus feet in that water, and then saved everyone's life by distributing the water and quelling the crowd. So he rose to a very high position. He had connections with kings, with government officials, and a couple principles, just to have something to take away that's practical and not to extend this unlimitedly. One of the principles that he is most known for is yukta vairagya. Yena tena pakarena mana kṛṣṇa niveshayat. The essence of the process for spreading Kṛṣṇa consciousness, somehow or other, facilitate people remembering Kṛṣṇa. The rules and regulations, they can come later. Our Prabhupada had demonstrated this in such a artful and almost humorous way by giving initiation to a group of fledgling Vaishnavas in San Francisco. And afterwards, after they had gone out after the initiation for donuts, and they came home, they found a paper tacked on their door listing the regulative principles. Yena tena prakarena. First, help them remember Kṛṣṇa, and then you can tell them the rules later. And Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvatī notably went against the grain of those who were attached to superficiality in presenting Kṛṣṇa consciousness, so much so that demonstratively he came to Radhakund in a conveyance, a nice car, which was unheard of for Vaishnava sannyasis. They would walk barefoot everywhere and wear very simple cloth. And he came dressed, and there's pictures of this, of him dressed to the hilt in modern clothes and what's because shoes and so forth. And he thus showed that the main principle was to facilitate people remembering Kṛṣṇa in any means they could, and one of the ways was to find the ways to attract people from the West, which is the instruction that he gave to his disciple by Charanaravinda. And recently when we were in Altadunga Road and we walked up the steps that were preserved, they were the same steps that our Prabhupada walked up to meet Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta. It felt momentous. He went there, and when he offered obeisances, everybody knows Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta gave him the instruction. And Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta empowered him to take whatever means. He preached that use technology. In fact, most thrilling experience I've had in a long time, or in this lifetime at all, was the first time we went on our yatra to the Bhaktisiddhanta Mandir, and the Gaudiya Math was still finishing their museum. But because we had Hansapriya with us, she wouldn't take no for an answer, and she kept saying, no, there's a Prabhupada disciple here, and he wants to see the printing press. And they said, we can't show it to you because the museum's not open and we don't want to show it to anybody. But minus all the details, she was able to convince them. And they took us, just 2 or 3 of us, up to see it. And the room was still scattered with building materials and so forth, but there sat the printing press, at least one of them they had preserved. And the greatest revelation for me of that was walking around the back of it as I was circumambulating and seeing the placard on it that said Cleveland, Ohio. It was made in America. And that's emblematic of the Yukta Vairagya that Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta, that was the highest technology that you could get at the time for printing. And he sent for those to be shipped, obviously, back there to Calcutta. And he kept them running constantly because he wanted to use all technology and all means to help people remember Kṛṣṇa. A second principle that he's famous for is his definition of darshan. In fact, it comes in a very easily understandable mantra in English that is so helpful, because one might tend to get an anxiety about advancing in Kṛṣṇa consciousness. Why can't I see Kṛṣṇa? And by the way, why is he messing up my life? And so forth. That's the mantra of the material world. But Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvatī Ṭhākura said, don't try to see Kṛṣṇa. Try to serve in such a way that he'll want to see you. Isn't that helpful? It calms you down right away, and you just think, well, let me do a little service. Maybe I can sweep the road, or I can wash some pots, or I can find out what I'm supposed to do. In fact, someone just yesterday was telling me he got advice from his guru. He was asking what he's supposed to do, or should he do this or that, and he said, follow the instruction you've been given, and you'll be fine. So Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta would come into temples without his spectacles, and when offered them, he would sometimes reply that I haven't come here for an eye exercise to look at the Lord. I've come here for him to see me. That also helps when we go for darshan. It's Krishna seeing us. In fact, he would stand near the back, near the Garuda Stamba, according to the Śrīla Bhaktisiddhānta Vaibhav, the book written by His Holiness Bhakti Vikas Maharaj, because he said Krishna will look out for his devotee, a Garuda, and then he'll see me standing underneath him. And that's telling, isn't it? That this is the method, as Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu used to say, it's not what you know in Krishna consciousness that counts, it's who you know and what you are, those two things. So keeping in mind his principle of darshan is extremely helpful. That go to be seen, show up so you can see so the Lord can see you, and serve in such a way the mood in which he'll notice that here's my servitor, he's serving the devotees. And then thirdly, highly notable was his bent for distribution of literature. I just mentioned, of course, the printing press. It's on his logo, and above the logo he had of the printing on the printing press. There's a lot in that logo. Modern logo makers, they just make a little swoosh or a dot, and from that abstract you're supposed to get everything else. He put everything on there, so there was nothing left for speculation. And he had a printing press on the logo, amongst many others. It's actually in the book. What page? Anyway, when you find it, let me know. And above it, it says Rag Marg, above the printing press. And that's unique in our line coming from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Śrīla Bhaktisiddhānta Sarasvatī Ṭhākura. And who imbibed it? Our founder Acharya, who said, I took it from my spiritual master's mouth that he was very fond of books. Page 54? 264. Page 264, you can take a look at the... And then you'll see the printing press at about 5 o'clock. And there's a madanga and a printing press. And he coined the phrase Briya Madanga. And above that, you'll see Radha Kṛṣṇa at 3 o'clock. And above the madanga and the printing press and below Radha and Kṛṣṇa, it says Rag, meaning the Rag Marg. It's a path of spontaneous devotional service. There's something very practical about our founder Acharya's, Srila Prabhupada's teachings, in which he advocated for using your senses to do good for others. In fact, he says that that's one of the ways in which, the best way, in fact, he says in the Bhagavad Gita, to control the mind is by thinking about how to do good for others. And then, as Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta opined, there are so many false philanthropic endeavors people engage in. For instance, people think of, well, let me feed people. And then he'd point out that in the course of doing that, they kill many animals. And there are other ideas about how to do good for others, but the highest conception is to give them the torchlight of knowledge. And it just happens to be in our line that all of our acharyas, starting from Srila Vyasadeva, and then you see Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, you see the Goswāmīs, you see our more modern acharyas, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Look at their photos, they're all posing with books, every one of them. And this is one of the practical aspects of Śrīla Bhaktisiddhānta Sarasvatī Ṭhākura. He wanted that there be the mass distribution of transcendental literatures to the world, and it was well known when I joined the Krishna consciousness movement, because Prabhupada mentioned it several times, that in the Mat, the Gaudiya Mat under Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta, that if a brahmachari went out and distributed, he said, a 1 paisa magazine. They used to make all kinds of publications, and he would come back. Then Guru Maharaj, Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta, he would announce it to the whole assembly of the devotees that he has done some real service. He had distributed a 1 paisa magazine. He considered it so important. So we have that legacy, and that was the way of organizing for many people to come, and especially for people from the West. That was the mission given to Srila Prabhupada from Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta, and the ideas of humble service and yukta vairagya, using everything. We inherited that from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvatī Ṭhākura, who brought that to us and gave us the way of life that we take for granted perhaps now. But that's all coming from our Guru Varga. It's bequeathed these invaluable principles to us that we can take advantage of to invoke the mercy of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Om Tat Sat. Dear Śrīla Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvatī Ṭhākura, dear Śrīla Bhaktivinoda Thakur, if you so desire, please instill in our hearts your compassionate mood for spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world. Please give us intelligence to know what real yukta vairagya is, so we can use everything properly to attract people to come to Krishna consciousness. Please let us work in humble service to your lotus feet in ways that will please you. Thank you for considering our request. Om Tat Sat. Everyone agrees with these prayers in whole or in part. Please unmute and say Hare Krishna. Vanchakalpadrusha kripa sindhubheva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha nantakoti vaishnaviniki jai gaur premanande. A special appreciation and kudos to all those who are on the backup team, who are carrying the mats around and the chairs and the cameras and all the making it seem seamless. Thank you very much for and all the other services I didn't mention for those too. Thank you. Hare Krishna.